Hello, and hello everyone, and my name is Olu Akintola, and I welcome you all to today's event, which is jointly brought to you by the collaborative efforts of Project Management Specialist Group, PROMS G, and BCS Edinburgh branch. We've got about 100 participants registered for today's session, which focuses on the topic connecting projects to business intent and benefits. But before we commence proceedings, let's go through some housekeeping. This webinar will be recorded and you'll be able to access it later after the session. All participants will be on mute, but please feel free to submit your questions, which our guest speaker today will gladly address accordingly, and especially during the Q&A session as part of the program itself. Now, some information about our guest speaker, Simon Harris. Simon is a director at Logical Model Limited, which has a business goal to improve the state of the art in chance and benefits. According to Simon, project management is not a discipline, but a necessary set of tools and techniques for the competent governance of change and benefits realization. Over the years, Simon has been instrumental to capacity building efforts and providing instruction on complex projects, project recovery, risk management, and quality at ESI, Atlantic Management Center, and Learning Tree, to mention just a few. I know that Simon's passion is to add the common sense that the textbooks manage to filter out, and he also is a contributor to the publication Project Manager Today. So, Simon's career has been an interesting journey, from being a computer operator on IBM S370 at London Stock Exchange, where he moved through programming on PL1 and JSP, to management services department on Unix and C and Oracle, development as team leader, project manager, third line, technical support. Oh, wow. I mean, the list just goes on.
Did I write this stuff?
So, you'll agree with me that given Simon's level of experience and expertise, we all should be prepared for an interesting session this moment. Please note that at the end of the session, PROMS G and BCS Edinburgh would appreciate a couple of your minutes of your very valuable time to give us feedback on this event, because this would help us improve our offerings going forward. Again, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this session as we explore the topic connecting projects to business intent and benefits with the guru, Simon Harris. Over to you, Simon.
Well, Olu, thank you very much for that introduction. I'm pretty sure I didn't write that, or at least not all of it. I think somebody's been doing some research on me. There were some things in there I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have included. I mean, not that there's anything to hide in them. Yeah, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about me, but I do have a slide for it, and it's the next one. So I'll just speak a little bit to this one on the screen here. The intention is to spend perhaps 45 minutes or so sharing some thoughts about how business intent is what should be driving the creation of the portfolio, and through that programs and projects. And I suspect that some of the things that I'm going to say are going to challenge some of the thinking that folk find normal if they come from a textbook direction. And so things like this have been trending over many years. I've got a great pile of them here. I'm not going to pull them all over, but they've been trending over many years to say stuff about projects that I think we can easily trace from the engineering view of how you run projects, and has a history that's perhaps 100 years old or something like that. And that direction has perhaps not always linked things to really why the business is working, and it hasn't always linked things to the governance structures that exist in organizations. Most organizations have some structure that is similar to a chair of the board and a chief executive, whether it's for profit or not, and they have responsibilities for running the organization in times of stability and running the organization in times of change. So I've spent a lot of time over the years trying to run projects and programs and struggling with some of the challenges that that creates, and thinking about why that might be. So the title here is reflecting the fact that what we ought to be understanding is how we follow the business intent, support the business intent, and possibly even lead the business intent if our role extends in that direction. And I'm thinking perhaps here about sort of enterprise PMO type roles. I do, as I go through here, hope to give you some concept steps and techniques, and that will take rather more than 45 minutes. So we're not going to go into that in great detail. I'm going to cover them. I'm very happy to follow up in subsequent conversation with folk if you want to understand in more detail, but there's a lot of stuff that we would need to go through to get right down to the how-to. I've seen a couple of folks say that they're not getting sound, but I've equally seen a number of folks say that they can hear things. So I think if you're not getting sound, it's probably a local problem. I have turned the subtitles on, so hopefully that will help you. I did have the subtitles. Yeah, thank you, Ian, for confirming you can hear okay. So if you're not hearing okay, it's local, but at least you can see what's being said in the subtitles at the bottom. This slide just proves that my arithmetic is poor, because I started playing around in projects in 1979, and 1979 to 2019 seems to be more than 30 years, and we've moved on a year since then. So I'm Simon, I'm crap at arithmetic. One Christmas day I did spend it kissing dolphins, or I think the dolphin was kissing me. My wife's idea that was. And I have tried flying microlights at various different times, and I have got quite a lot of books in the house. I'm more than happy to say more things about me, but I'll just move on in the interest of our time frame. Now, to start talking about this topic with some purpose and some intention, I would suggest to you the books that I've just held up and the rest of the ones that are on the shelf over here have increasingly been trying to say in recent years that the project manager role is about delivering benefits. It's a long debate, I think, to get to the bottom of it, but I'm going to say that in my experience, most organizations position the project manager role as a quasi-technical role where that person is expected to understand what the development team is doing, and to expect that quasi-technical role could understand all the nuances of business and benefits and operations, etc., is stretching the role too far. So I think there is a trend of suggestion about what the project role should be. Personally, I don't think it's moving in the right direction, but I think it is driven by the fact that we're not good at linking projects and benefits. That is to say, we're not good at linking the top and the bottom of the organization. And so giving that some thought, I'm going to first of all suggest that I think a project is an endeavor that is generally constituted, brought into existence to deliver a product. You could call that an output if you like. If I was playing with some of the other books on the shelf over there, they would call it an output. I'm going to suggest that a program is then the surrounding structure that takes our product and our organization. And there's some important stuff in what I'm saying here that I'll expand and echo later. But the program takes the product and the organization as a whole and brings us to a position where we can start a benefits flow. And now we are getting into the title. We're getting into the mechanics of what the title of the event's about. And I'm going to say that a portfolio is a balancing act between all of the demands that we could have on the resources that are in the organization. And I'm going to express this in a slightly different way to the way that is often used by project and program related folk to talk about portfolio. I'm going to say the portfolio is all the uses of energy within the organization. So you might talk about a sub portfolio in there, which is just the projects and programs. But I'm going to start from the perspective that the portfolio is all the things the organization is doing, some of which is RTO, run the organization, and some is CTO, change the organization. And I'm going to express that in terms that Professors Kaplan and Norton would have been quite content with when they developed the balanced scorecard, which is to say that we have to balance short and long term, and that's about being able to generate activity today that generates benefits tomorrow. Benefits tomorrow pay for activity tomorrow, and so we get a cycle, and you have to be balanced in the factors that lead to benefits. And I'm going to say that value is benefit in excess of cost, and that and the caveat here that is always necessary for those people who then want to say, but it's not all about money, and it definitely isn't all about money. So there's three definitions I want to start with, and now I'm going to build some pictures of how organizations work, and I'm going to build a picture about 3 times over because I want to take different perspectives, and I want to get to the position where we have a gated governance structure running across those perspectives. So I'm going to start with a landscape, and the landscape runs down the page from senior leadership at the top to execution and folk at the bottom. And I'm saying business is grey or black, and the consideration of product and of management is blue, and activity to execute and achieve results is red. And I'm going to use those colours consistently as we go through. So here's a bit of a key. I've got a few other colours in there. I will cover those as we need to. And I'm going to say that the organisation is typically drawn as the pyramid, and I am quite conscious of turning it upside down for servant leadership, but that's not something I'm going to discuss in detail here. And I'm going to say that the organisation has a finite amount of resource available to it to operate its total set of activities. And things happen outside the business which mean that our reason for existing, our mission and our values are affected in ways that trigger us to consider the design of the organization. And that design of the organization is the mapping from what we believe in, why we exist, what pressures we're facing, and how we're going to meet those pressures. And I'm going to suggest that how we're going to meet those pressures at that top level of the organization we can call vision. So I'm going to say mission is enduring, and I'm going to say that vision is a point on the horizon that we can work towards, and so vision is ephemeral. You can change that. You can use those words the opposite way around. Miles, YMMV, is your mileage may vary, i.e. you may have a different opinion on it. Nothing I'm saying I believe is the absolute truth. Everything I think is a possibility, is an option. So pressure hits the organization, and that causes the folk at the top or at the bottom, but that's complicating the picture too much just at the moment, causes the folk at the top to say this is where we need to go. That can then be considered as part of the portfolio, and I could here start talking about things like Kanban driven portfolio, but that then starts us to consider how we use our resources. There's a cascade of intention and constraint. There's a delegation of authority and tolerances and freedoms, and this is the beginning of building governance structures. But it also means that all the resources, when we have need for change, cannot be used for running the organization and generating operational benefits. We need to redirect resources into the change side of our activities, and that's where our programs and our projects are then consuming resource. Now, as a result of pressures on the organization, something that I don't think is very commonly expressed, or I know it's not very commonly expressed in these books, is that it's all very well a project producing a product or an output. You don't get any benefit from that until it's in use in operations. And the thing that people frequently fail to identify and describe with sufficient clarity is that means that there's an operational change stream as well as a technical change stream that's necessary, and these two things have to converge if the outputs are going to be used to generate outcomes and from that benefits. In fact, what I would say is that for many businesses, a lot of the time, there is no need for a technical work stream, but there is always a need for a business change work stream. It might be a change in attitude or a change of operational procedures, etc., but there's always a need. So independently of whether there's two work streams or one work stream, we get results, impacts, products, deliverables, and they get they create a demand on the resources of the organization that mean that we've got a behavioral backlog in the business, breakdown structure if you prefer, and a technical breakdown structure or backlog in whatever the development community is. And that doesn't have to be IT, it's all forms of development. And there's a call on the resources of the organization to deliver that, which leads to whatever form of planning that we wish to do. Doesn't matter if it's sprint planning or if it's predictive waterfall type planning. And that then, with an understanding of intent, planning being that if we do these things, we'll get this end result, leads us to be able to execute, monitor, and as a result of monitoring, react and replan. And we can do that react and replan on a daily basis with daily stand-up meetings and 10-day basis with, say, 10-day sprints, or we can do it continuously with Kanban, or we can do it over quarters and years if we're doing more predictive forms of planning. And as a result of that, we deliver products into operational activities where, combined with the work streams of organizational change in operation, we get outcomes and habits and run the organization day by day. So that's what my RTO DXD is. Run the organization day by day. And the crucial bit there for generation of ongoing benefit flows is that this becomes habit. When we get habit, we're then going to get benefits flow. Now, there's a few things to note. One is that as that cascade comes down the organization, so we get the devil in the detail need to clarify, which is why I have the escalate and the buck stops here. And the buck stops here is really at each of the different levels in the organization. More to clarify on that very shortly. But eventually we get benefits. And then the thing that I've put specifically on here together with a little thumbnail or an icon of a gate is to say we should be understanding benefit entry tests, and I'm going to later talk about benefit exit tests, and I don't actually mean the benefits have stopped at that point generally. I mean the business has re-established a habitual way of operating, and we're back to run the organization rather than change the organization. That's a very complicated picture, isn't it? Let's clear a little bit of the stuff out so we can simplify it. Pressure comes down from the top and leads to two work streams. One in the organization in terms of the behaviors and the habits of folks operationally, and one in terms of building stuff. And we can in fact simplify even more and just say the focus we need is pressure in the marketplace causes us to have visions. Now, I'm just going to re-explain that picture again. So I'm starting with the same background, but I'm coming at it with some different thinking here. So I've already said operation in the outside of the organization, capital markets, direction of regulators, competition, those sorts of things can drive change. What I didn't emphasize in the last slide was that actually it might be technological change at the bottom of the organization. So very typically our technical folk understand that there's capability that we're not exploiting. It's not understood elsewhere in the organization, but this could be moving up the organization. I've just explained everything as coming down. There's both, there's up and down. So I'm going to suggest at the bottom of the organization, my little red alien there is a technical person, project team member perhaps, or an operations person, engaged in operational procedures or engaged in project activities, and with a focus on quality, yellow for quality in this picture. And they operate inside some sort of project or program or operational environment, and they are constrained or limited by things like technical architecture, so perhaps things like TOGAF standards. And there's some level of management above them, either heads of function or program management, and they are constrained by a rule set, governance structures to pursue value for money, generate returns on investment, those sorts of things. And they sit underneath some form of direction. So we're just describing a governance structure here, and those folk have to implement the vision that came from the board. So there's a picture of the model. I've got some few more things to put in it because I want to get the governance structure in here. So at this level at the bottom, I'm running operationally until some force for change arrives, and that force for change may push me into a project, and that project may then run as adaptive or waterfall, predictive, incremental, any of those sorts of ideas. That's sitting under that middle level that has supervision duties in operations, but then has idea through to benefits flow as its responsibilities. And that's the bit that's a bit broader than the project. So I'm going to define that as program. And I'm going to say one of the implications I think here is to say that every project always has a program around it, even if it's only one project. That's not how the common definition of project and program runs. And I'm going to say that all of that sits inside the portfolio, and that was our previous page. Because now I want to put the governance structures on here. Someone gets an idea, and that idea has no approvals around it, and there is nothing to approve. So we start doing some work that says, if we were to pursue this idea, would it be worthwhile? And that starts to consume resource and get attention. So at some point, we want to ask officially, should we continue to pursue this? And I'm going to say Q for qualification, and it's gate number 1. And then I'm going to say sanction for the point at which the organization says, we will commit enough to say whether or not this thing should be allowed to proceed. And that's gate number 2. So that's why we got Q1 and S2. And I'm going to say typically the qualification bit starts in the middle of the organization, but the sanction bit is at some sort of portfolio or investment community level. And if they say, yes, that's okay, then we start to get delivery. And delivery may be iterative, agile, which is why we got 3-3-3, so that we've got, because we might have multiple deliveries, but we could have just one. And then I'm going to say 4th is we close out the project activities because they have delivered the technical work stream. But this is where the most focus now needs to come into how the business takes that capability that's delivered and starts to generate benefit, or if you're a public sector, you start to generate value for money returns. And the benefits start flowing after that. And at some point, we need to make the decision that says we're back to business as usual, and that there is no longer a project or program type activity here. It's now just RTO, run the organization. So that's now added the governance structure over the hierarchy and said you could be coming from top down or bottom up, and probably in most cases both. So again, let's just simplify the diagram and let's just summarize a few points. Nothing new now, just repetition. At the bottom of the organization, we have the realization of what's come from above. Something slightly new to say, we're constrained here by physics and politics. This is the red bit of change the organization or run the organization, whether we're in operations or in technical delivery. We're operating below the management level of translating strategy into action, and that's being constrained by things like technical architectures and strategic alignment. And it's also being constrained perhaps slightly higher up the organization by departmental and organizational structure, vision and roadmaps. And I could take a diversion off here and talk about things like Conway's law, which you may or may not know. Conway said that any organization that designs a system will design something that matches the structure of its organizational layout. In other words, it will design something that matches its current governance. That second layer of management, split both to strategic alignment and vision and roadmap, operates under direction, which is the board, the vision, the top table, and that's the unprecedented decisions that are forced upon the organization because of the world around us, of which COVID is currently a particularly current pressure. So just simplifying again, we've got 3 layers there, and I've got a simplistic model of 5 gates. I now want to talk about the timeline for that. So I've still got my layers of the organization, and I've still got my gates, and I'm going to say that when change arrives, it takes us from a left-hand side of the picture, green, stable environment, into less stable, and then out of less stable to stabilizing, and that's old business as usual through to new business as usual. And we have this little bit in the middle, which is the well-precedented ideas of project management, where we go through the structures to have decision making for unprecedented stuff because we're going through change. But to address the topic that was in the title, the benefits bit is on the far right hand side of the picture here, and before we start projects we're on the far left hand side of the picture here. So we need to map from one side to the other, and that's about the benefits management journey, which is much broader than the project journey. And within that benefits management journey is a program management journey, and I could take the program books off the shelf here, but notice how that's broader than project but narrower than what we need for benefits. Somewhere early on, the qualification bit that we've just looked at happens. That takes us into thinking about the change objectives, and I've got double-headed arrow here because I've said to you there are 2 work streams that have to happen. Now, at the beginning of that, I think that what we need to be doing if we're going to link things together is we need to be setting the vision and the goals, and it's not a typo, the next bit. We need our benefit entry and exit tests, and we need to confirm that those benefit and entry and exit tests are achievable within the political power of the sponsor and the technology, etc. So we have benefit entry and exit tests, because at the beginning we're saying, boss, how will you know if we've succeeded? And the boss says, well, everything will be working as I expected in a year's time. And then we say, is it realistic to do this within a year? Do you have the power, the resources, and the commitment to actually achieve that? So right from the beginning here, we're challenging the leadership in the organization to say, when you set us an endpoint target, have you got the will and the power and the resources and everything else to achieve that? So that's one initial crucial start to the process of how do we get the alignment of projects with benefits. The benefits thinking has to actually ask itself and challenge itself about whether or not we have the appropriate alignment. Then we need to know how we're going to do benefits harvesting, and it's okay if we answer that by saying, actually, I don't know at this stage. We need to foster engagement and ownership, and by setting a vision of the end point at the beginning, we facilitate that. But to explore it would mean I'd need much longer than our sort of 45 minutes or so that we're going to be discussing here. And then I need to work backwards from that end point. If I'm going to achieve the end point, what have I needed to have achieved before it? and so on. Because remember, what we're trying to do here is link the end state of benefits to the current state of starting a project. So that's being in two extremes and working backwards from the end point till I get to something that's recognizable as the target for the projects. There's a lot of content in this section, in this session. The slides are all available online. You can go look through them at your leisure. So we've got the business planning bit, we've got the technical delivery of classic projects. I'll clear off some of the mess in a minute, and you'll just see the project section in there, but that's just the little bit in the middle. Look how much surrounding structure there is to have business planning and then business transition. And that business transition leads to us being able to have our benefit entry test. Have we created the circumstances under which the business can now generate benefits? And then eventually the idea of, are those benefits now flowing in a stable state as business as usual? So let's just have a look at a more simple picture. That more simple picture is qualification, two streams of work. One is technical, one is about preparing the business. Both of them start with a vision of where the end is. The vision of where the end is has been challenged as to whether or not socialized is the term in English and nemawashi is the term in Japanese. If you go and Google and look up nemawashi, you'll find some suggestions about how the processes of socializing targets might work in some environments. Now I want to look at the cash flows for what this looks like, and then we're at the point of expressing our tests. In terms of content coming your way, if we were the roller coaster at Blackpool seafront, we're just about getting to the crest and we're about to cruise down the far side. So what we've said so far is organizations have pressures at the outside and intent either cascades downwards or rises upwards. It works through a gated structure. That gated structure has to run from idea to realization, and the way we do that is we start with the how do we tell what the realization has got to deliver and start to work our way backwards. And I haven't covered the backwards bit with you yet, but that's coming next. Now I want to look at what the cash flows look like against this picture here, but the background in there is a bit distractingly sort of a bit of start and a bit of end. So let's just clean the background up and just say the cash flows might look like this across all those 5 gates. If I start to invest, I have increasing sunk cost. This is the project spending time, effort and money to deliver something. And I may have subcontractors in there. I certainly have payroll in there. So the lines going down is, well, the blue line going across is the business expenditure, which may be 0 until we hit a payment milestone, at which point there's a sharp increment. But that element that I've put up there so far is the project investment side of things. And I could draw earned value or burn down curves on this. So there's a line for a burn down, perhaps a burn down is typically a bit straighter, but that's an earned value curve very happily. And it's at the end of the point where the sunk cost is the deepest that we start to get to the point where we could possibly be earning returns by having combined our technical and our behavioral changes in the organization, and now we can start to get benefits flowing. If I turn that line of expenditure up the other way, draw it the other way up, then it is absolutely classically the schedule, the planned value or planned cost of an earned value curve, fitting precisely in with either traditional project control structures, or as I say, if I draw it downwards, then I could call it a burn down chart. But what now is the position is that we are able to start generating benefits. And we will have stopped traditional projects, but we wouldn't have stopped programs, I hope. We certainly have not stopped if we've got a benefits realization focus. So we've got a cash flow now, or a benefits flow, a value for money, more soup to the homeless, whatever the benefits are, rising up. And at some point on that curve, maybe before or after break even, I'm going to say this is now run the business, not change the business. So I can put the gates on here. So there's my start, deliver, and close the project gates. I had slightly more detail when I showed you earlier. And at some point, I'm going to say benefits entry. We have got benefits flowing. They need to be optimized. They need to be ramped up, but they are flowing. And that's a conversation I probably want to have with the finance director. And at some point, I'm going to say these changes have become habit in the organization, and we're no longer in project or program. We are now in operations. So it's the two gates at the end, and it's the how do I get those in place that's the bit that's crucial to me in terms of the topic title. So that's the whole journey now. Let's start looking at how we might apply some tools and some techniques to that journey in order to make it concrete, to make it the outputs of workshops, to make it the sorts of things that we can have conversations in the organization with people around, and make it something that we can implement. Now, at this point, I want to take a slight diversion to a bit of philosophy. There's a picture that I think is very important as illustrating a point of philosophy, and it's this picture here. And I want to just role play a conversation very quickly with you. Imagine two people having a conversation, and one says to the other, as you can see, we have a circle here. So they're looking to the left. And the other one says, what sort of idiot do you take me for? It's clearly a square, because they're looking straight on. And it's always a point of philosophy for me, or of concern or angst. When the first person says it's a circle and the second one says, I can see a square, why do the pair of them not say, clearly neither of us can see the whole picture, because both of us are saying with transparency and earnestness that we see something different to the other. So if at that point those two people had thought about what it was that each of their perspectives were seeing, they would say, if we combine our two perspectives, what we see is that we're looking at a cylinder from different perspectives. And the reason that I wanted to put that picture up is because this one is taken straight out of the Managing Successful Programs book. And I'm going to say this is a cylinder where everybody sees a circle or a square, because all the arrowheads on this diagram are the wrong way round. And I'm going to say that the arrowheads being the wrong way round on this diagram is profoundly important for the same reasons that we don't say things like that we have a chairman. We talk about chairperson, for example. The words we use reflect the models that we can build and the things that we accept as normal, and they are important. So I'm going to start from the grey end of the picture with marketplace, mission, and values. And I'm going to say that when we identify the need for a change, a vision, we're talking about a capital transformation that combines those needs into an expression of a benefit flow of some sort, value for money or profit, and that there might be multiple benefit flows coming from our vision. Doesn't have to be, but there might be. If I'd made the diagram more complicated, then those benefit flows and objectives might be supporting more than one vision as well, but I didn't want to make this diagram too complicated. And those benefit flows will only occur if we have both our technical deliveries and our organizational or behavioral deliverables. And actually, I can describe the arrival or the creation of those in the organization as milestones. And now I have worked my way backwards. I have backcast from marketplace pressure and what that means to the organization in terms of vision to milestones that I can give to project managers. So on the left-hand side of the picture here, let's put some project type stuff in. enabling technical project work, enabling business behavioral transformation, and that behavioral business transformation is creating, awful phrase, but realistic, human capital. And that technical innovation is creating fixed assets, things that can go on the balance sheet. But I've now linked the two halves together, and I can start putting some very concrete test descriptions against this stuff. So over on the far right-hand side, I've got sponsor inspection. These are my benefit entry and benefit exit tests that say basically I'll believe it when I see it, and I'm going to come and check. And I've got a bit more detail to give you to put behind how all that might get framed and described. But I hope you can imagine that it wouldn't be too difficult to start running some workshops now where we give people a template or a outline for what a test statement should look like. We can borrow a statement like, as role I want feature so that result, i.e. lifting it straight from sort of agile use case type description, fine-grained user stories, etc. We just lift exactly the same inspiration and we move it 2 levels up the organization and say, as chief executive, I'm coming to check these behaviors are in place because I posit that these behaviors will lead to a benefits flow, and that's directly balanced scorecard type territory. Midpoint, those operational and technical behaviors are the 2 things that are necessary to enable the momentum for the change to build. And I've still got my traditional quality control, quality planning and quality control driven quality activities that lead to me being able to do things like earned value analysis. So that's the structure that might sit alongside some sort of breakdown structure. And I've got a breakdown structure here running from the top of the organization to the bottom of the organization. And I'm just going to put the little backward managing chain of activities that I just talked to you about alongside it. And I'm going to align the gray with the gray and the red with the red. And I'm just going to say now that, so at the top of the organization, I'm going to challenge the most senior person involved in my benefits stream. In your role, tell me what behaviors you will see. And then I'm going to challenge at the operational level. In order for the boss's behaviors to happen, what do you have to have done with your staff in terms of their procedures and behaviors and attitudes, and what infrastructure would you need in terms of systems? And now I've split out the behavioral and the technical. So as head of function, as high-level manager or leader in the organization, I'm talking about my people will be performing these behaviors because these behaviors deliver the outcome that was wanted at the level above us. And now I can turn to people like the finance director or the chief financial officer and say, can you see a change in our benefit flows, in our cash flows, etc.? Because if you can, we had the cause and effect linkage correct. And if you can't, we either had the cause and effect linkage wrong, or we haven't done enough changing people's behaviors, or we haven't built the right infrastructure. So that finance bit is not saying, have we reached a target of say 10% more customer penetration? It's saying, can you see customer penetration going up? Can you see cash flows increasing? Can you see the results of the behaviors? And as I said on the previous picture, we still have all that low-level stuff about how do you do project milestones, where you do the missing, wrong, and extra type testing. I've run some unit tests, some system tests, some integration tests. So now we have a structure to work from the top of the organization downwards, and we can use classic tools like network diagrams, Microsoft projects and Gantt charts, or we can work through a design, build, integrate life cycle, classic waterfall life cycle, or we can work through the iterative life cycle of minimum amount to deliver the smallest possible increment. We can use lean startup type minimum viable product approaches here. That's all going to fit in the bottom level. So now we've got our all the tools that we need in place, and I'm just going to summarize the whole, and then I'm open for questions and to explore any of the elements of that more easily. So we're looking to harvest benefits, and we do that either at the end of a waterfall project, or we do it from the point of release in phased projects, continuous elaboration, rolling wave type stuff, or we do it from the point of release in agile and iterative projects. And we do that with some sort of control structure. I didn't take you through the details here, but this diagram that I just put up here is the PRINCE structure, with the references on it are the project management body of knowledge processes. I just integrated the two. They fit together hand in glove. I only really wanted it to say it's a picture in 3 time frames: benefits definition, change definition, change enablement, and benefits harvesting. And it's a model in 3 layers: direction and strategy, management against baselines, and technical delivery. And that PRINCE control structure and those PMBOK or agile tools and techniques fit happily into the structure here. We can be using Scrum if we want. I don't know if you can see the thumbnail there of the cover of Ken Schwaber. Can't remember the other guy's name, with an iterative Scrum type approach there. And what we're overlaying on this is a starting point with leadership evolving and socializing their benefit entry tests, cascading those down the organization to ask operational management what behaviors would need to be in place. And I haven't mentioned it so far, but how would we incentivize that? How would we link to the benefits structures within the organization for bonusing and recognizing achievement from people? And then eventually we hand that down into the community for planning as either adaptive or backlog and sprint structure. Then our subject matter experts can construct both product and behavior changes, and they get things that they have to seek clarification on. That gets escalated. It was the arrow going upwards on the original diagram, and that gives our leadership challenge that says you must act if we are to deliver successfully the benefit entry tests that you said you wanted to deliver. So that's the core of the project structures turning over. Worked perfectly with PRINCE and MSP. Project Management Institute doesn't have quite so much to say on the topic, but again, it works perfectly with what's there. And eventually we get to the scope validation tests, proving that the projects have delivered the right deliverables. We have the behavioral stuff in the business side, combining with those deliverables, and then beginning to understand how to use the deliverables in a new way of working, a new pattern. And if we've got that right, we start to see the benefits flow. And when we're starting to see the benefits flow, we know we're going in the right direction. If we're not starting to see the benefits flow, then we know that we need to take some action somewhere in the behavioral or the product side of things, in which case we now have a feedback loop, and that feedback loop could be exactly the same as in intent as we have at the end of sprints, with a sprint demonstration, product demonstration, and that we have in sprints at the end of sprint retrospectives. So now 45 minutes was pretty swift. Apologies, it's 49 minutes. It was very swift to cover all that stuff. But the guidance we normally get in project management is that little bit in the middle. The guidance that exists is the whole picture. If we cascade, understand our endpoints, cascade them, socialize them, use the capability of our people, then we have connected one to the other. We have about an hour's worth of scheduled time, I think. No, we have 3/4 of an hour of scheduled time to now pick the bones out of this and understand any of the details that you're interested to explore further. It's the sort of thing that I do in my consulting activities. You can find me on LinkedIn fairly easily. There are my contact details. This is about bringing us as organizationally. Yeah, thank you, Asim, for putting the slides into the chat. So this is stuff that I do as bread and butter with program offices and organizational structures, etc. So that's the whole journey. I'm not sure if we can unmute people to ask questions out loud. I guess we can if we know how to do it. And I'm very happy for you to put questions into either chat or the questions box, although Miles's question appears to be the last one entered. I don't know if there are more questions in the box. I haven't seen any more appear. Olu. Oh, you came just briefly on screen there. So I'm not hearing anything.
Hello? Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, great. I think perhaps we want to take Miles' question first. Thank you very much.
I think maybe questions stopped working for me because the last question I've got from Miles with YMMV, which was your mileage may vary, but I don't see any questions after that. But there is a little drop.
I do have another question. Let me just see this. I do have another question here. And the question relates to how do we ensure break even in a project with tight cost considerations, yet realizing expected benefits?
I don't think we can ensure it. I think you can help the organization's governance structures be aware. I think that you can help the organization to frame with reasonable clarity, sometimes great clarity, but with reasonable clarity where it's attempting to get to. And then you can audit trail very clearly that where we think we are going to end up is enabled by this previous step, which is enabled by this previous step, which has a previous step of today. So we can map very clearly from today to the future. The ensure bit would mean that we have absolute clarity of the fact that if we take these steps, it will lead to this benefit. I don't think that clarity exists. Otherwise, we wouldn't need things like stock exchanges by which we moderate how capital moves between different businesses. So we can make the process of expressing a beneficial end state much clearer. We can make the linkage of that beneficial end state to today more granular. Granular is not quite the word I want, but because I don't want to go into detail, because if we go into detail, then the likelihood is the detail is wrong. There is one other thing that I didn't mention as I went through the commentary here. If I start this process of understanding what targets at the top level are going to look like and how we prove those as we come down the organization, I can start with or I can go and visit people like the chief financial officer, the finance director, etc., and say, what are the influences on the organization that drive value that we recognize as an organization? How do you put that into either the income and expenditure if you're public sector and not for profit, or how do you put it into the profit and loss if you're a business with equity owned privately or publicly? So I can build a list of the things that the organization values in either social return or financial return types. And then for each of the tests that we define for benefits entry and recognition of return to business as usual, I can ask, is this test aligned with the things that the finance director would recognize, or other leaders in the organization? And if it's aligned, then I know that what we're doing is we're driving benefit for the organization. If it's not aligned, then I have to be asking, is the organization changing its mission, changing its strategy? And I can also go the other way around, which is to say, if I say I have a number of things here that are beneficial, in fact, let's go down to 2, because then I can illustrate with my other hand. I've got a couple of things here that are beneficial, and then I look at the things that we consider to be benefits, and I've got 4 of them, and these 2 align. I can now see I've got 2 things that are not being supported. So I can do a two-way chat. I can do a two-way comparison between what are the things that the organization sees as beneficial and what are the things that we're doing in the portfolio that we would want to be driving to link the 2 together. But that isn't an assurance or an insurance. It's an improvement. Don't know if that helps, Miles.
Thank you very much.
I see we've got a few more questions come through.
Yeah, there are a few more questions in there. There's a question from Pritam and wanting to know, is this an example of behavior-driven development principles applied to benefits management at program level?
Well, I'll tell you what, Pritam, you tell me, because BDD, TDD, and is BDD Dan North? There's a whole long list of XDD things, and it is on my reading heap. And I don't know, there's about 5 different sets of something DD, various different initials DD. Yes, it is Dan North, says Pritam. You know what? I know it's Dan. I was sufficiently savvy to sort of think, is this Dan North? But I haven't done enough homework to know whether or not it is an example. My guess is that since you asked the question, it probably is. But I have to say, I didn't come to this via Dan North. I became aware of Dan North at some point for some reason and thought I must go and have a look and see what he is saying and how he's saying it. So I haven't done enough homework to link it, but I would expect your expertise across these sorts of general areas and raising that question to suggest that your suspicion is correct, and that should also probably mean I should go off and read him and test-driven. Well, it's got correlation with test and behavior-driven development, at least from the level of the name. Pritam, maybe we should sit down and have a conversation around it at some point.
I think that would be lovely. There's a question here from Bill Nicol, and wanting to know, what would you suggest to avoid people in an organization given the present culture mindset?
Well, Bill, it would be interesting to know what you mean by the present culture mindset. Olu, do we have the capability to take people off of mute so that they can, oh, inertia, okay. But if we can take people off mute so they can talk, that might be helpful. And Bill, did by present culture mindset, did you mean the sort of COVID type challenges that we've been subject to over the last couple of months, or were you thinking more broadly than that? Okay, that we always have. Okay, so what we talked about in the journey through all the stuff that I've just shared with you was, if we ask the organization's participants at all levels, what does an appealing future look like to you? Some people will be able to tell us and give us a good description. Other people won't really be able to tell us, and they'll say, well, it's all shit around here because this is wrong and that's wrong. And so some people are capable of expressing a view of the future, and other people are capable of expressing a reason why the present is not right. In both cases, we can either directly or indirectly take what they're saying and construct a set of tests that would say, are we moving in the right direction? Have we arrived in the right point? When we construct that set of tests that tell us whether we're in the right, whether we've got the right future description, we can provide that to people in a way that allows them to get some sort of imagination of what their future looks like. And typically when people are subject to a view of the future, they say, that's terrible. Look at all the things I'm going to lose. Who's the Daniel Kahneman? The other, it's another Dan. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky wrote about some of this. It's about the power of regret. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote about it in terms of grief. So if we provide people with a vision of the future at the beginning of the change, we give them the maximum amount of time to become psychologically, sociologically adjusted to the future. And we also, by drawing a vision of the future rather than a description of the solution, give them the opportunity to become engaged in designing how we arrive at that new future. So we have the potential to provide people with a mechanism to see what's coming, to be participatory in achieving that new future, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee that we will be able to take everybody on that journey with us. But at least we've found out early enough that we can now, depending on how you want to phrase it, release them to pursue opportunities elsewhere, which is often used as a euphemism for lay people off or fire them or whatever, but I don't actually mean it like that. I do genuinely mean, folks, this is where we're going. Do you want to be on that journey? No, I don't. Okay, how can I support you go? How can I support you exit? There is always the challenge, of course, that if we're doing this in the context of an organization that's paying people through a payroll, then ultimately there is a contract there, which is you turn up and work and we pay you. So it isn't entirely about being a democracy. But by describing the endpoint early and inviting people to contribute to how we achieve that endpoint, by working on those steps backwards, we can make it much easier for people to go through the psychological journey of becoming adjusted. And in that adjustment, we are addressing inertia and we are addressing culture. I don't know whether that fully answers the question for you, but it's certainly a number of significant contributory enablers. There's
Thank you
also
very much,
one here from, sorry, yeah.
I've got a question in here from Zostust. Pardon me for the pronunciation. And I reckon the person would like to know, could you please comment with real example, how do you put your structure in the context of a startup which has an exit strategy, say for example 5 years, and trying to find out what is their business as usual?
Okay, yes, I can. Not sure how much I want to, and I'll explain why that in just a second. The techniques that we've been talking about here come from lots of different sources, and probably the most direct usage of them has been fundamentally in organizations that are large scale, not startup. They're quite often government and public sector and the like, and I don't necessarily always have the freedom to talk about them in real example terms and too attributably. But I use the techniques in all of my thinking for the things that I'm doing, and I am currently having conversations with a few folk around could we build something that capitalizes on the way COVID has dramatically changed the mindset of many organizations around whether or not they need bricks and mortar offices. So many organizations have been on a journey where they have been saying technology is evolving and enables us to do things that we didn't used to be able to do, but hey, we've got an office and there are all these reasons why you can't do stuff with technology that you can do face to face. And so they did not have any urgency or any committed intent to change the way they did business. And then COVID came along and over basically the course of a weekend cleared all their offices out, and over the course of the following week or 10 days implemented all the infrastructure that was necessary, or started to use the infrastructure that people already had to start working in ways that were remote, and within a month or so had pretty reasonable working practices that were beginning to show them that going to an office was not particularly necessary. And now we're another month down that line, and people are becoming now to the point where they actually understand how to do things like Alt-M in Zoom to mute everybody. So I think there's been a fundamental change in the way that people won't go back to. So I'm talking to people at the moment, and we don't have a business as usual, to go back to Zolt's question. We don't have a business as usual there because we have a vision of what the future looks like that isn't comparing against what we're currently doing. We have here is what we want the business as usual in the future to look like. And some of my colleagues in those conversations are somewhat younger than I am and are talking about, well, we can set a business up and run it for a decade or two. And I'm thinking, yeah, but I want an exit strategy in 3 to 5 years because I don't want to be there in 10 or 20 years time. So the conversations we're having are exactly the ones that I've outlined with you here. What will our service provision look like in terms of a day-to-day and week-to-week delivery of service to our customer base? Why would our customer base be buying from us? What does value look like? And I've written some descriptions of what those end states look like. And then the question that we ask backwards from that is, in order to have that end state, what prerequisites would we need in place? And to have those prerequisites in place, what actions do we need to take? So that's exactly as he's asked there, although my timescales are more like 3 years than 5 years, because it's the conversation about startup, it doesn't have a business as usual. And in terms of the techniques I've described, it's exactly the techniques that I've shared with you there. Zolt, please feel free to add more question if that hasn't cleared everything for you.
Okay.
There's a new
Thank
one.
you very much, Simon.
Sorry?
I said thank you very much, Simon.
Okay, well, you're very welcome. There's a couple from Ian here.
Yes,
Having
let's go through
instigated project benefit reviews 6 months after project's ends, projects were all new products, 80% failed to make the profit return via not achieving forecast sales. All other product outcomes having been achieved, for example, quality and costs. How do you stop sales forecasting to get new product development project on the to-do list? Okay, I was with that right up to the last sentence. How do you stop sales over forecasting to get new product development projects on the to-do list? I'm not quite sure I understand the last few words there. but how do you stop sales over forecasting? I hope this answer makes sense to you, Ian, without sounding like it's stupidly glib, but you don't forecast your sales in numeric terms. You forecast your business operation in behavioral terms. To back from that a little bit and to broaden the conversation, there is a I don't remember which university. There is a Professor Michael C. Jensen, I think is the correct name. I'm pretty sure it's definitely Jensen. I think it's Michael C. He's got some reasonably well-known articles in things like Harvard Business Review, one of which is called something like Paying People to Lie. And he's very strident about how, for example, salespeople manipulate sales targets by, for example, holding sales back so that they are not registered in the current quarter but registered in the next quarter because they've already made current quarter sales quotas and they don't want to have more sales in this quarter. So the behavior of setting numerical targets around any of these sorts of things drives what's got lots of different names, but one of the names are things like toxic targets. So anytime you set a numeric target for these sorts of things, you are in very dangerous territory because you are not asking people to perform in a particular way. You're asking them to achieve a particular target. You have left carte blanche for them to behave in ways that are very often about local optimization of just what they want for their target. If, however, you start at either the top or the bottom of the organization, but to make the conversation a little simpler, if you start at the top of the organization with, as an organization, we posit that if we have these behaviors by our people with these elements of infrastructure and support, we will generate results going in the right direction. And then you put in place the KPI structure that allows you to measure whether or not you have the results and measure whether or not you are taking the actions, which is absolutely classic Kaplan and Norton balanced scorecard. I mean, you just take Kaplan and Norton off the book shelf, as it were, and say, they've told me how to put the measuring structure in place. They haven't quite so much told me what to measure, but I can now work that out using what we've been talking about this evening. If you have that posit, if we have these behaviors, it will drive the things in the right direction. Then you have the structure by which you can create the bonusing systems and all the other dimensions. And its only dependency was that your cause and effect hypothesis was correct. So when you now start doing the measurements and you find that you are not driving the result that you expected in your leading metric, then either your cause and effect relationship hypothesis was wrong, or you haven't done enough in one of the different aspects of the levers that you can pull, and that needs tuning. And that's why when I was on this slide here, assuming that I'm still sharing a screen, I had the purple curve going up with some circles on it saying this is where we make adjustment. We're making adjustment there because we're seeing our leading and trailing metrics. We're seeing the trailing metrics say I took the action, and then we're not seeing the leading metric move in the right direction. It's not a guarantee, and it's a change in the way in which we look at the things that we're trying to do to see the cylinder rather than just the circle or the square. I'm sorry to be a bit philosophical in that description there. I mean, we could perhaps have some more concrete conversation, you know, like what was your NPD trying to build? How did you structure it? What did you put in place as KPIs, etc.? What were the behaviors? How did you incentivize the operational leadership in the organization? What were the things that were going on in the background. Another source that you might find useful, I apologise for the fact that it actually says ICT in the topic, but another thing that's quite useful there, is that backwards?
You might want to turn that upside down, please.
What, like that?
Oh wow, that's even backwards.
This is Realising Benefits from Government ICT Projects, A Fool's Errand by Stephen Jenner. You don't have to be into IT projects in order to read this and find it useful. But I guess given that this is a BCS conversation, it's quite likely that most people are. You could instead of going for that, I would recommend that. You could alternatively, of course, that'll be backwards as well. You could alternatively look at that by Jenner. I'd go for the small one. It says more than the big one, really. So Ian, that's the best I can do on an answer for you there, I'm afraid. Just in this forum, in this format.
Well, thank you very much again, Simon. And
Zol came back and says, thanks, that was my expectation. Startup is a big program. Zol, I would read Eric Ries and Lean Startup as well. I think there's some good inspirational stuff in there. Bill's also put something here. The acceptance of new technology has become the norm. The cultural acceptance has facilitated this from the COVID perspective. Risk helped focus on what's important. Yes, absolutely agree, Bill. If we haven't got any more questions, Olu, then I guess we're getting to a point where we could wind up.
Very well, thank you very much. And so, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Project Management Specialist Group, PROMS G, and the BCS Edinburgh branch, we wish to appreciate your time and also express our appreciation to our erudite speaker today, Simon Harris.
Didn't even finish my beer.
Oh yeah, please do. And certainly in appreciation of Simon's time today with us, Simon, would certainly receive from the headquarters of the British Computer Society a token which is going to come in form of a well documented publication from the organization. So expect that in the post very, very soon.
Thank you very much. It was not necessary. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much again for coming. Right. Now, for participants who might be interested in engaging with Project Management Specialist Group, PROMS G, and the BCS Edinburgh branch, please feel free to reach out to us on our web pages and social media handles. If you check the chat box, we have there links to virtual webinar events, which promptly advertised. In fact, for PROMS G, on June 16th, there is another webinar that we are organizing, and this revolves around mind mapping your work breakdown structure for project success. So feel free to get in touch with us either through the PROMS G website, the LinkedIn page, of course, reach out to the BCS Edinburgh branch website. We've got wonderful programs also lined up there. You can also have the opportunity of looking at previous events. And of course, feel free to reach out to Simon Harris on, Simon, you want to go back to the page where you have all your contact details? That'll be wonderful. So people can reach out to you on LinkedIn, on Twitter, your website, and of course, and be able to borrow from your wealth of experience.
And if you want to do some stuff on transformational leadership, there's some stuff there as well.
Marvelous. Okay. From PROMS G and from BCS Edinburgh branch, we love to hear from you and see you on our future events. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much again. Thanks and goodbye.
And Olu, and Asim, thanks very much for excellent hosting.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Asim, you did a wonderful job of putting the answers into the questions there. Amazing that you could get that typed so quickly. So fantastic.
I tried to capture the salient points.
You did.
Very well answered. Thank you.
I was amazed. You did
you very much.
fantastically. And thank you to all those folks saying thank you.